All right, thank you, Tyler. Yes, as you said, I will be going over a bit of how the athletes qualify for the Olympics and the Paralympics, as well as a bit of what happens in between the 4 years, in between the two competitions. So the first thing are the Olympic committees. There are national Olympic committees that have to earn national quotas for each athletes to compete in the Olympics. The standards for each sport are different to qualify, so the standards for, say, a swim athlete might not be the same as someone who competes in basketball. These standards are set by international federations. They're also sometimes called national governing bodies. Usually that's just in the United States. These are sometimes set from competitions, while most are selected by evaluations and team selection camps. So for the Paralympic classification, because these are for people with disabilities, they must be evaluated based on their limitations to play these different sports. They're divided into different sports classes. These are to designate athletes with similar limitations, and these classes are important to decrease the impact of their disabilities. That way, the competition focuses more on the athlete's ability and skill rather than how much their disability impairs them. Each sports classification system is different because different disabilities can affect these different sports, well, differently. So athletes can compete in some sports, but not others. They must go through an intensive and international classification to verify their eligibility. The things they look for include the verification of the eligible impairment for that specific sport, their degree of limitation and their allocation of sports class, and observing them in a competition. Sometimes these athletes still aren't allowed to compete, and that does not mean that they don't have an impairment that will drastically affect their ability. It usually means two different things. So it could mean they don't have a primary impairment that makes them eligible, or it could mean the impairment is not severe enough to significantly limit the athlete's ability. All right. So in between Olympics, there are things that happen. They're like the training centers. In the US specifically, there are two training centers, one in Colorado and one in New York. The athletes that practice there are selected also by the international federations, or in the US, the national governing bodies. And these national governing bodies submit their year-by-year plans for these athletes. These plans are for the athletes to train in the 4 years in between the Olympics and up to them. An athlete would most likely be chosen to train there based on their ability to compete in multiple different sports. However, just because they train at these centers does not guarantee a spot in the Olympics or Paralympics. Sometimes there are little issues with the selection of athletes that go into the Olympics or these training centers, and these are where Odmondsons come in. Sometimes athletes feel that there have been issues with the team selection, so an ombudsman or a government official will help the athletes understand their selection in specific areas. These areas include selection procedures, dispute resolutions, legal representation, affected athletes from these selections, the national governing bodies, complaints, and past decisions. So know that you know about how athletes are selected for the Olympics and how to get into the Olympics and what even happens in between the competitions. Here's Ross to tell you about the closing ceremony. Thank you.